On our last full day in Italy, on the way back to Rome, we stopped by the remains of the ancient city of Pompeii. Inside the gates, we were transported into a city preserved by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. We passed mosaic-floored bathhouses, temples to Roman gods, and your favorite, a 2-story brothel with frescoes of suggested sexual positions. I pointed at one, jokingly, raising an eyebrow. "Really? You're going to proposition me in the middle of an ancient whorehouse?" "There's a stone bed right over there." "Keep it in your pants, Jupiter." And so I did. The next morning, we were on a plane to New York. I decided to forgo the drugs, which impressed you until a 1-hour crying jag over the Atlantic. With the exception of the ride home, you called it the best 2 weeks of your life. It would be followed by the 2 worst years. We were starting to plan our next trip, Germany, at the suggestion of your library coworker, when we received the news. Ovarian cancer. As if that particular part of your anatomy wasn't sensitive enough. The doctor told us about an experimental trial at Mount Sinai. Risky, with terrible side effects, slim chance of recovery, essentially your only hope. You had stopped listening. You were tapping your foot against the ground and looking out the window. The doctor started addressing me. I nodded. I took notes. I told him we needed time to consider it. After we were dismissed from the office, you shot out of your chair, bolting in front of me. I didn't catch up until we'd reached the parking lot. "You're upset," I said. "You picked up on that?" "You need some time to absorb the news." "Whatever you say, Professor. You are, after all, the Genius Grant nominee." Self-nominated, of course. "You encouraged me to do that." "Only after you'd already decided. Honestly, it embarrassed me that you would think so highly of yourself year after year." "Is that what you need right now? A punching bag?" "I'll allow it if it has some therapeutic value." "How generous." "I can't talk to you when you're like this." "Then shut up." "You need to take a moment. Your blood pressure is the least of my worries." You shook your head. "Couldn't you be insensible for 1 minute? Join me on the edge of an irrational act? I just want to drive a car against a brick wall or scream in an overfilled church. Can't you understand that?" Your tirade had begun with an order of silence, but you'd ended with a question. Context indicated you were being rhetorical, but I always erred on the side of responsiveness. "No." "Fuck you." Rhetorical. Later that night, you returned to your normal self. After an evening of silence, you burrowed yourself into my arms and fell asleep. The next morning, you apologized for your behavior the day before. You said you were fine. Everything was fine. It was uncharacteristically general, frighteningly vague. This time, however, I let it go as per the suggestion of a book entitled Letting Go of Loved Ones. Nevertheless, that night, despite my protests, you insisted on sleeping on the couch. The next morning I made coffee, which we drank over the Sunday paper. Without looking at me, your eyes still on Arts and Leisure, you said, "I'm enrolling in the trial." Though I had at least 7 follow-up questions, I replied, "Okay." After your first treatment, a combination of radiation and a new cocktail of drugs, I realized you needed full-time attention. I took an indefinite leave from the university. I never understood the details of your regimen. This was at your request, or rather, your demand. After the initial doctor's appointment, you wanted to go to all subsequent visits alone. It was, I could tell, your hope that in depriving me of knowledge, you would strip me of the will to inquire. I did everything you asked. I absorbed your fits of anger. I held you when you were in pain. I hid my own pain from you. That was my gift. The appearance of strength, even if illusory. The security of an unchanged husband who adored you as he always had, even in your altered, you would say diminished, state. Your health deteriorated, increasingly frequent trips to the hospital. You lost weight, lost the ability to eat solid food, lost the will to cry. One night, after you'd vomited blood, I took you to the emergency room. Your regular nurse, Nancy, on the last hour of a double shift, was called from oncology. After she'd talked to your physician, a spindly, ringlet-haired boy, not a day over 28, she greeted me in the hallway. 21 weeks, she said. It took me a moment to understand she was referring to the duration of your treatment. That's correct, I said. No one's ever done 21 weeks. Maybe one woman in Minnesota. They're doing this in Minnesota? She nodded. I think that's what I heard. And how did she do? She paused. I don't know. Fine, I think. I did not appreciate being lied to, but allowed her to continue. She was a widow, no living family. After week 9, it's normally the family that stops it. She was looking ahead and not at me. It's not really my choice, though, is it? She turned. You could convince her. She's in a lot of pain. I'm aware, and she may stop it at any point. I don't think you understand. I understand all too clearly. My wife has chosen this course, has endured its terrible side effects, and for what? For people like you, for one. For if, God forbid, you should one day find yourself in her unenviable diagnosis. No doubt, the result of this trial will at least be marginally helpful. And yes, for selfish reasons as well. For a chance at survival, however unlikely. If she chooses to grasp onto that, if she wants to fight despite unfavorable odds, who am I to stop her? What do you mean, fight? She hasn't told you. Told me what? Though she was violating your doctor-patient confidentiality, I was thankful for Nurse Nancy's clarifications. According to her, your trial had essentially ended, failed, 2 weeks ago, at least in terms of its central objective. Now what was happening, to my horror and confusion, was simple. No, not simple. Excruciating, radioactive, blood in your stool data gathering. That evening, I waited until you were comfortable, until the drugs you received in ICU kicked in. It was a rare and fleeting respite from pain. I hated to sully it, but you had left me no choice. With a hard and clenched face, you explained the reasons you'd entered the trial, not out of some misguided hope. The doctors and your own independent research had already dashed that, but out of a need to retain some sense of utility. With your retirement from the library, with me taking care of the affairs of the house and our general well-being, cancer had essentially become your occupation. I understand, I said with a nod. But if you ran a true cost-benefit analysis, surely the diminishment of your quality of life outweighs the benefit of the limited data you're contributing. It seems unethical for your doctors to even be allowing this. Never mind, you said. Leave it alone. This isn't just about you, dear, but patients in the future, vulnerable people. Leave it alone, you repeated, softer but with more force. I conceded. In the 2 weeks to follow, without the burden of the treatment side effects, you became mellower. A temporary uptick in mood and manner, a too brief window of actual improvement, then no more. You became weak, bedridden, a daily struggle to get you to the bath. Bowel movements were elaborate, if infrequent, productions. You started having trouble with memory. The doctor hadn't told us about this last possibility. You kept asking for stories. But when I came to your room with a stack of books, you looked disappointed. Tell me about Italy, you specified. Tell me what happened in Italy. Of all the stories about us, Italy would become your most common request. I told the same story over and over in exactly the same way. My consistency, you said, soothed you. Then one quiet Thursday morning, in the middle of an unusually cool spring, I awoke next to you and noticed you were no longer breathing. It had been your wish to die in your sleep. It was little comfort at the time. It has been 5 years since you passed. The university allowed me to return soon after your funeral, and though I've been encouraged since to retire, I've remained in their employ for the duration. I do not know what to do with free time without you. We had always imagined additional traveling upon our dual retirements. Still, as much as I enjoyed Italy, I do not think I would enjoy traveling alone. I think about our trip often and repeat to myself the story of our excursion, sometimes, absurdly enough, out loud. It is not the measure of my happiness with you, contrary to my analyst's suppositions. A year after your death, I found myself weeping during an airline commercial and immediately sought professional help. Yet when people inquire about you, it is the story of Italy I tell, not because it is a particularly riveting account, too little conflict, not much in the way of narrative momentum, but because it is pleasing, gentle, easy listening in every sense of the phrase. My therapist spent 7 sessions on the topic, but came to no satisfying conclusion. Nevertheless, I continued to see her. With your death came 2 losses, both the only person I ever enjoyed observing regularly, and the only person who ever bothered to observe me in kind. And so I settled for the latter only, which I paid for, though I found her theories facile at best, despite her impressive credentials. You're not unlike a prostitute, I told her at our final session. I'm done with therapy. Its minor benefits no longer justify the cost. Besides, I have already diagnosed my problem, and no amount of analysis can alleviate the attached sadness. The most interesting person I've ever known is no longer. All of these words, this entire account, has been nothing more than a prelude to a long overdue declaration. Though it must be clear by now, though you already knew it, it deserved to be said 1,000 times over. I love you. I love you. I love you.